Authentic, real-life J6er with us, Ken Sorgente, a round of applause. He's going to say some very brief words about Arthur and I after knowing each other for quite some time. And then we're going to get to the festivities with Joe and Lauren speaking and then actual debate. So here you go. Thank you.
I'd just like to say I'm really glad this is happening. I've known Arthur Schaper since 2017. You and I went to Cantor's together once. Had a nice meal.
We sure did.
And I've known Nick the same. He came to our events in Laguna Beach in 2017. And I have respect for both these men, though they are on different sides of the issue. And I've known them to go hard and go long. And we're talking 7-8 years now, right?
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to know both you guys, and happy to witness this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name's Joe Cameron. I'm kind of a co-founder of this organization. I live in Laguna Woods. Nick is really the arms and working of the facility, but I want to welcome everybody for coming here. You could be doing something else, but this subject is very important. For one, to me, it's nothing less than you got the most powerful forces in the world that can bring us to peace and prosperity, or we could have an extinction event. If the nukes start flying and both sides have them at the ready, it could be a really horrible thing. So this is probably the most important subject on the planet right now. A lot of people aren't aware of it. A lot of people have some level of understanding. So to make best use of our time tonight, the goal is to all of us, wherever you stand on the issue, to learn more information either about supporting your position or really using you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use your ears to really listen and try and learn something about a different perspective at things. You know, we're all trying to understand what's going on, and we all come with a different background. So the way we're going to do that, though, is to be very respectful. I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence in a minute. He's going to coordinate the timeline and the activity. These two guys obviously prepared information and want to share important information with you. So let's give them our full attention with no interruptions. Lawrence will be the moderator and coordinator of things. But the good part, too, is that it's going to be formal question. He'll get into the details of it. But like I said, everybody has a different life experience. There will be time for questions from the audience to either bring up an idea and ask for feedback in the form of a question for the second half of the thing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lawrence, and thanks again for coming.
All right. Now, Lawrence, so we are about to begin. Thank you, everyone, for being here at the Speaker's Corner. So the format's going to go like this. There's going to be an introductory opening statement by each debater, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. There's going to be 10 questions. 20 questions were 20 questions were given to each contestant months ago, actually, a month or so ago. And of those 20 questions, I'll be reading off 10 of them. And that each person will have 2 minutes to give their answer. And of course, during that 2 minutes, there needs to be like total silence in the room. Then I think there's going to be after that the candidate has given their answer, if the other person, if the opponent wants to rebut, he will get a 1 minute rebuttal period. Joe will be the timekeeper on all of this stuff. And then we'll just kind of move through the 10 questions that way. It's going to be a great debate. We're glad all of you are here. And once we conclude with the debate portion of the evening, it's going to go into a question and answer. You've all done that. Just bear in mind, it's question and answer. It's not This is a facility where we can't go till midnight or 1 and they just charge. They'll actually come and start kicking us out. So we're very time cognizant. So when you ask your questions, ask a question. Have it be to the point. This is not the time to give a monologue or to state your opinion, and da-da-da-da-da. It's ask a question that can be answered rather succinctly by the people. Okay, with that.
And then Lawrence, just
Yeah.
sorry, the question and answer for participants. If you'd like to ask a question, you are limited to 30 seconds to ask the question. We don't want rambling statements. Again, deliver as much invective and hatred in your 30 seconds without trying to keep any confines on you just for a matter of time, okay?
And I'll say, yeah, we don't want TPUSA where somebody stands there for 5 minutes. We're better than that.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, so he tried. I'm giving you the benefit of the benefit. There was supposed to be another moderator who is pro-Zionist. He didn't show up. I don't care because he's abiding by strict rules. He's asking questions, and that's it. It's not going to be like NBC or CBS where I have to go JD Vance or something.
Exactly.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Okay, so with that, we will begin, and
And
so,
I just had the questions. I will put that away.
That's all good. I just got my.
Okay, that's fine. All right.
You can keep those. Art.
so Arthur, you're up. Well, let's see, your turn to give your opening statement, and go.
My name is Arthur Schaper, and I'm the field director for Mass Resistance, the international pro-family group that makes the difference. I am mostly a pro-family activist. However, truth is the most important investment. I'm tired of the lies, the distortions, and omissions that are taught about Israel. Sadly, a growing movement on the dissident right, as well as the progressive left, demonizes Israel and normalizes anti-Semitism. And these disturbing trends war against the founding principles of our country. For too long, too few on the right have not debated or challenged these ideas. And I want to challenge the lies and change the discussion. It's time for truth. It's time to point out. Support for Israel is not in conflict with MAGA. Support for a stronger Judeo-Christian influence in the United States governance does not mean one must reject or oppose Israel. Jews and Israel are not the main sources of conflict, war, and trauma in the Middle East or around the world. Israel is a force for good and not for evil. I am glad that Israel exists for biblical as well as moral reasons. Jews in Israel do not dominate our foreign policy, nor are they the final consideration for legal or political choices. America's friendship and partnership with Israel should continue, all based on constitutional norms. Hamas, Islamic terror are the true sources of war and misery in the Middle East, and they must be destroyed. There can be no Palestinian state because the residents in Gaza and the West Bank do not want one. They don't want a two-state solution. I do believe that Arabs, Jews, Christians, people groups can live in peace in the Middle East with a Western Judeo-Christian influence. Last of all, anti-Semitism is a real threat, not just to Jews, but to all of us. As Paul Johnson asserted, it is a mind virus that destroys the host countries who embrace it. Thank you.
Okay, good. And now we'll go to Nick Taurus. Nick, your opening statement, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nick Taurus, and I am a Roman Catholic, a Trump loyalist, and a proud supporter of the Palestinian people. For over a century, beginning with the first Jewish aliyah to what was then Ottoman Palestine in 1882, the Palestinians have been victim to the greatest heist in human history, the theft of Palestine by the Jews. Since then, the Palestinians have been displaced, disgraced, and degraded as the world looks away, refusing to acknowledge the terror, inhumanity, and outright psychopathy of the Zionist settlers and later on the Jewish state of Israel. I do not consider myself an expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict and readily acknowledge that there are those with more esteem and credentials to debate this topic. Yet, when called upon, they did not accept the invitation of our group, the Speaker's Corner, for whatever reason that may be. So, in light of that, I decided to step into the fray and represent the pro-Palestinian argument. Although I do not consider myself worthy of representing the honorable Palestinians on the debate stage, I will gladly step into the gap alongside them, since no one else would. Over the course of our arguments this evening, I hope to effectively demonstrate the historicity of the Palestinian state, the necessity for the Palestinian state for the continued existence of the Palestinian people, and the barbarism which has been the foundation of the Zionist project since its inception. Free Palestine!
All right, thank you, Nick. So now we're going to move into the questions portion. And so you're going to start the clock when he starts speaking, right? Okay, so first question, Arthur.
Okay.
All right, there we go. How would you frame the events which transpired on October 7th, 2023? Sneak attack or justified response?
It was an absolute anti-human atrocity. It was an Islamic militant attack on innocents. Not just Jews, Christians, and Muslims were killed and kidnapped. There was a Bedouin Muslim who was recently released by Hamas, and a Jewish doctor caring for a Muslim patient in an Israeli hospital. You won't see that in Gaza. In Gaza, you'll see Jews. Well, you won't see Jews because they're gone. And the Christians that are there have to be in hiding or they have to run away. Same thing is true in the West Bank, by the way. Muslims, Hamas, they shut down Christmas. It wasn't the Jews that did it. It was the Muslims who did it, the Muslim militants. I'm going to try to adjust my rhetoric because there are more Muslims every day who are supporting Israel. They despise what Hamas did. They reject what Hamas did. What they did was an atrocity. They burned babies in cribs. They raped mothers in front of their children. 1,500 citizens, civilians. There was no war. And yet there's this attitude that Israel's the aggressor. Israel has offered a state 5 times. I'll probably be repeating that at great length. 5 times. And the so-called Palestinians, you're going to hear me saying that a lot, you'll find out why, said, no, we don't want Jews in our backyard, go to the sea or die. What you saw on October 7th was an absolute atrocity. That was a genocide. The goal is to wipe out all Jewry. And they're not going to stop there. They will go after the Christians next. Hamas has announced it many times. What's my time?
30 seconds.
Okay, very good. Atrocity, absolute terror, no justification. They are funded and supported by Islamic militants around the world, and they're propped up by, with all due respect, useful idiots. Musab Youssef, those are his words. I'll be mentioning him a few times later on.
All right, good. Nick, did you want to make a response or just move into the... Okay, we're going to read the question again for Nick. So Nick, how would you frame the events which transpired on October 7, 2023? Sneak attack or justified response?
Well, I think when you're reviewing the history of what happened on October 7, 2023 and the operations carried out by the Palestinians, I think there's 3 important considerations to take into factor. First, what was the actual scale of the carnage? 2, did Israel actually have any prior knowledge of the attack? And 3, I'd say, probably in addition to having final knowledge and the scale of the attack, I'd probably go with saying, whether or not I'll just get into it. Anyways, in regards to the scale of the attack, first off, Arthur mentioned 1,500 casualties. The original was actually 1,400 casualties, which was initially reported by Israeli media. There is some potential revision coming up with that. If you look at what the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has found, they actually have the new widely accepted number, which is 1,195 casualties, 815 of which were civilians. And that number is also facing a potential revision due to a France 2024 report. France 24 is like kind of the French BBC. They did a report earlier this year citing Bitois Lemy, which is the Israeli Social Security Agency, which found that actually only 695 civilians died on October 7th. So again, we have this number from 1,400 down to 1,200, now down to potentially of that 1,200 or 1,195, only 695 being civilians. We can't really get a coherent number. The second thing, what was the, did Israel have prior knowledge of the attack? Well, according to the New York Times, Israel had come into contact with documents which were known as Jericho's Wall. That's what it's known to Israel's authority, which outlined in specific detail Hamas's plans for an incursion into Israel. And finally, I tripped up there. When you asked about whether the actions of Hamas and the Palestinians were justified on October 7, 2023, absolutely so. According to the Jewish Voices for Peace, 243 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank prior to October 7th. And also on October 4th, 2023, the IDF shut down businesses in the old town of Jerusalem and allowed Israeli settlers to go into Al-Aqsa. So to conclude, it was absolutely justified. Thank you.
Okay. You wanted to make a 1 minute rebuttal.
1 minute rebuttal.
Okay, so Arthur, go ahead with your...
There's always going to be this argument about scale. I can go one step further. For every so-called, every conflict, there's been 24 Palestinian deaths to an Israeli. And there's a reason why. Because the whole so-called Palestinian movement is based on terror. It's based on the destruction of Israel. There is no desire to recognize a Jewish state at all. They have started this from 1948, when 5 Arab states say we want to push the Jews into the sea. And that's been the case over and over again. So why are there so-called Palestinian casualties? It is a result of war. We could talk about, so how many deaths have Japan deliberately attacked the United States. 2,400 Americans died in Pearl Harbor. Far more Japanese died. But you know what? Japan started it. And the United States finished it in order to defend our sovereignty and put an end to that evil. So this issue of disparity as a moral standard is completely flawed.
May I rebut that?
Yeah.
Or is there an open? Okay, so just when we're talking about terror, because you keep talking about terror and the Palestinians are terrorists. I mean, I don't know if anyone knows about the foundation of the state of Israel, but are anyone in here familiar with the Lavon affair? Or the King David Hotel bombing. Actually, a lot of it occurred after the founding of the State of Israel, apologies. But the King David Hotel happened prior. Has anyone here ever heard of the assassination of Folk Bernadette, the UN envoy from Sweden, by Zionist terrorists? Yes. Have you heard of the Stern Gang? Have you heard of the Haganah? So this notion of terrorism, again, this is only applied to one side. You know, one side is called a terrorist when they're defending their homeland. One side is called a terrorist for defending women and children, but the other side are called noble when they're shooting at pregnant women and mothers. That's the distinction. So again, if you're going to say there's terrorists, you need to include the Stern Gang, you need to include the Haganah, you need to include people like Jabotinsky, Ben-Gurion, and all these people who I consider terrorists. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on.
Hey, it's fine, thank you.
Okay, so we'll go back to Arthur. So, post-conflict, we all want this conflict to be over, of course. But so, Arthur, what is your vision of a successful conclusion to this conflict? Would it be a one-state solution, the two-state solution, an international partition? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, the final solution would be very simple. Israel takes back Gaza, and they take over the West Bank. Excuse me, Judea and Samaria, let's give it the proper terms, please. That is the only way that you're going to see lasting peace in the region. They should have never given up the Gaza Strip in the first place. Shame on Ariel Sharon. He got a stroke, and I think it was divine judgment for doing that. There were Jewish settlers there. The Gaza Strip was a beautiful place. It had a floral industry, it had a tourist industry. Arabs, Jews, Muslims could live at peace. Then it was given over. The Jews were forced out. They forced themselves out. And then it turned into a third world hellhole, terrorist hellhole, which has been attacking Israel ever since. They kill Muslims, not just Jews, by the way. Let's not forget that. So that's the solution. Long-term issues. No more foreign aid, especially to the so-called Palestinian cause. These kids, they need to be educated properly, not indoctrinated. That's going to take a while. But I can tell you, a lot of Muslims throughout the Arab world, they are fed up with the so-called Palestinian cause. Saudi princes have mentioned how their youth, they don't care about it. They want their lives, they want their families, they want prosperity. This is a long-standing move. None of the Arab states even want the so-called Palestinian issue. Israel will have to step up. They take over peaceably. They incorporate the region for the short period, even up to 30 years. They'll be run as like Puerto Rico, as kind of like second-class states. Yes, I said it. They are not able to elect the people. They end up electing terrorists. That doesn't work for the people in the region, doesn't work for Israel, doesn't work for anybody else. And we see an integration where the entire country is restored to Israel. West Bank and Gaza, Judea and Samaria, back under Israel.
Okay, good.
Is that it, or?
That's fine.
Okay.
So, would you like to rebut for a minute?
Can I rebut when I'm done with my statement? Is that okay? I'm gonna make my 2 minutes, and then you can rebut what I say.
If I rebut, then you rebut. If I don't, then
that's fine. That's fine.
That's what we'll do.
Okay, so I'll ask the question again.
Yeah.
So, Nick, what is your vision of a successful conclusion to this conflict? One state, two states, international partition?
I believe in a two-state solution to this conflict. Right now, there are Jews who have been born, lived, and died in Israel. That is their country. I respect their right to exist and to defend themselves when warranted and within proportion. Again, that's very important. When warranted and within proportion. Now, like I support the right of Jews to have a state, I also vehemently support the right of the Palestinians to have a state which is coherent, contiguous, and cohesive, in which they can achieve their national destiny without interference from the Israelis. Now, if any agreement were to be made on the partition of the land, I think it should be based off the UN General Assembly Resolution 194, which was passed on December 11th, 1948, by the same UN General Assembly which approved the plans for the partition. The outlines of this plan were as follows: a right of the Palestinians to return to their homes, a more equitable partition of the land reflecting realities on the ground, and an internationalization of the city of Jerusalem. If I were to partition the land of Palestine into two states, this is what I would do. I would give the West Bank, Negev, and the Gaza Strip in their entirety, completely dismantled of Jewish settlers, to the new state of Palestine. The Jews there would have to return to Israel, which would basically be the Tel Aviv coastline to Gaza, in addition to the Golan Heights, which they'd be allowed to keep. Further, there would be also an international peacekeeping force which would be stationed in Jerusalem, dividing the city between east and west, west belonging to the Jews, east belonging to the Palestinians, with an international peacekeeping force comprised of Russia, the United States, Jordan, and Egypt to ensure that peace is being maintained on the ground. This is a workable solution. This is what we have to do. The reason why this hasn't been solved for so many years is because the Palestinians are being denied what has been given to the Jews over 80 years ago, a state. Now is the time for a Palestinian state, one which is functioning, one which they can achieve their national destiny. No more Nakbas. Thank you.
Okay, so now you want to do a rebuttal,
So this
and
is
you
what-
want to do a rebuttal.
This is what I suggest. If I rebut, he gets to.
Yeah.
If I don't, then we move on.
That's fine.
I will rebut. and I'm willing to
That's
continue
fine.
this
Let's
discussion.
go.
So,
Let's
okay, there's a lot to filter here. So, okay, you want a Palestinian state, but the so-called Palestinians don't. As I said before, they were offered one 5 times, and they said no deal. Second of all, you can interview the residents of the West Bank, Judea-Samaria. You can interview the residents in Gaza. They don't want a 2-state solution. They want 1 state, and there's no Jews in it. That's the problem. I go back to Golda Meir. You can't negotiate peace with a party that doesn't think you have a right to exist. Israelis, Jews, they do want a 2-state, another 2-state solution. There already was one. Jordan would be the Arab state. Israel would be the Jewish state. There it is. The 5 Arab states around said, hell no, they wanted to push the Jews into the sea. That's 1948. Let's not forget about 1967. The Peel Commission, we haven't talked about that. The Jews said, you can have more. Beersheba would have been part of Jordan if they had accepted it, but they said, no deal, we don't want Jews in our backyard. The problem, the impediment to any so-called Palestinian state has been the so-called Palestinians. Oh, I'll have to go to another one. Go ahead.
Okay, no. So, is everything all right with you?
That was a minute.
Okay, all right.
That's good. Do you want to rebut?
Yeah, I'm gonna rebut.
Get your timer ready.
Okay, all right. So here we go. Basically, a couple things you said earlier about all these people in the Middle East wanting states or Israel to, basically just eliminate the Palestinians or not for them to have a state. First off, when you quoted the Saudi youth, that wasn't the Saudi youth. That was actually Mohammed bin Salman, and he said that he doesn't care, but the youth of his country care. So actually, the problem in the Middle East is you have all these sellout royal dynasties like the Hashemites and the Sauds who have no problem selling out their fellow co-ethnics just so they can have trade deals with Israel and new housing developments. That's the reality. The people of the Middle East, the Arabs, they have been screwed over by the West. And this goes back back to World War I. The British reached out to the Arabs and they told them, if you revolt against the Ottomans, we will give you a united Arab state. And you know what they did? They turned around and made a deal with Lord Rothschild in the Balfour Declaration and promised Palestine to the Jews. This is in history. This is undeniable. So again, if you want to talk about the Palestinians aren't capable of a state or all these horrible things, I just think that's fundamentally not true. And what's being denied to them has been denied to them for actually longer than 80 years. I'd say 100 years, and that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Okay, good. So we're done with that one. Good job, you guys. So now this next question is a little bit more like philosophical, the big picture. We've been kind of in the nitty-gritty of the war. So Arthur, we'll start with you. Tell us, is America's relationship with Israel helpful or harmful to peace in the Middle East?
Oh, very helpful, absolutely, and especially Donald J. Trump. When he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, that saved us money. It saved us money. So just on that alone, that's a big deal. Recognizing the Golan Heights. Don't you like it? A president just says something and things change. You don't have to drop bombs. You don't have to shoot guns. You don't have to spend money. If this question does come up, I think that we should stop all foreign aid. American money is hurting Israel. It's crippling them. I have spoken to Israelis and their allies, and they said, this is limiting us. This is cucking us. Let us take care of ourselves. We don't need your stinking money. Donald Trump did a lot more, and he saved money doing it. So I'm okay with that. I believe that because we are a force for good, and we recognize another force for good, we're part of the Judeo-Christian heritage, we're part of advancing Western values, that Israel is very much a part of that. We should absolutely maintain our relationship with them. It is good that we moved the embassy. It is good other countries started to move the embassy. I'm waiting for more, but they're a little too timid or they're too communistic. We should keep our relationship, keep it positive. It should be one of mutual trade. You want some weapons, you can buy it. And if we want something, we'll buy it. We get a lot of technology from Israel. They are the breadbasket of Europe. They are a countervailing force against China, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. They blow up terrorists. They've wiped out Hezbollah, and they made Iran look like a bunch of weak pikers with their little fireworks show. Thank God that Israel is willing to do what Joe Biden won't. Thank you.
Amen.
All right, so Nick, we'll ask you the question. Is America's relationship with Israel helpful or harmful to peace in the Middle East?
Well, America's relationship with Israel is absolutely harmful to peace in the Middle East. It's actually a total impediment to peace in the region, I'd argue. And there's 4 kind of key elements we need to look at when we're assessing our relationship with Israel and if it helps us. The first one is in regards to nuclear proliferation, preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world. The second is preventing the proliferation of, extremist groups that threaten our vital interests. The third is halting mass migration from the Middle East. And the fourth is ensuring the flow of oil from the Middle East. Let's look at the first reason. The proliferation of nuclear weapons. Now, how many of you are in here familiar with Israel's illegal nuclear weapons arsenal? Does anyone know about this? They have a totally They have a totally illegal nuclear weapons arsenal. So if we're trying to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, how do we look when we're trying to communicate in a good faith basis with countries like Iran or North Korea, whatever you may think of them, if we're concurrently sending $3 billion a year in foreign aid to a country with an illegal nuclear arsenal? We look like total hypocrites. It's ridiculous. The second thing I want to talk about, the proliferation of radical groups who might threaten our interests overseas. If you look at the words of groups, the leaders of groups like Al-Qaeda, like Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, oftentimes in their writings, like Osama bin Laden's letter to America, he talks about the treatment of the Palestinians. So if we're concerned about these groups, threatening our way of life or perhaps threatening our country, is our relationship with Israel helping to make us safer from terrorism or anything like that? I'd argue no. The third thing, halting mass migration from the Middle East. How can we ignore the demographic transformation of not only our country, but of Europe due to Zionist warmongering, which has been facilitated by Jewish NGOs like the Hebrew Israel Aid Society and IsraAid? We can't ignore that. And finally, fourth, when it comes to economics, look at this, what's going on in the Straits of the Red Sea, with shipping in the Red Sea totally shut down. If this transfers over to the Straits of Hormuz, where 1/4 of the world's seaborne oil travels through, you're not going to be able to drive to work. So again, we need to reassess our relationship and remind Israel they are a client, not a patron. And Art, you'll get some extra time.
Okay, I could do the 1 minute. I guess it'll eat up my time. Could I be allowed to take notes, or is that?
No, you're totally within your rights to take notes. Absolutely.
Okay,
Someone have a pen? Yeah, someone have a pen for Art. There you go. I'm going to steal this.
No, you need that one. I'm sorry. I have a pen. Okay, that's gonna.
Okay, someone give me a pen too.
Am I me? Okay, we're both doing it. So
I'm on pause. So you
All right.
Thank you.
Great job, you guys, so far. Hi, everybody.
Okay, but I can read my check. Okay. Okay, regarding nuclear proliferation, a country has a right to defend itself. Defend itself, not attack others. So that's why Israel, have as many nuclear weapons as you want. Iran, get rid of the Ayatollahs, then you can have as many nuclears as you want. So that's the first thing. Regarding the mass migration issue, Israel does such a great job fighting illegal immigration. They build walls north and south. It is not the Jews' fault that you see all these illegals overrunning Europe and America. It's kind of sad, but it's the white liberals' fault, by and large. This is what I see. I see a lot of these white liberal loonies, Jew and non-Jew, who are opening up the borders and doing this. I don't want to get rid of white people. I like white people, so I don't think the skin color is the issue, or the ethnicity. What was the other thing? Nuclear mass migration. Oh, terrorist groups. Muslims have been attacking America since the late 1700s. Ever heard of the Barbary Pirates? Islam has been at war with America before Israel even existed. So they would still attack us even if there wasn't an Israel.
Okay, so can I get a rebuttal?
Right.
So first off, defending itself, that's interesting. So when Israel defends itself, does that include when it steals nuclear technology and secrets from our country, like they did in Apollo, Pennsylvania? And also, let me talk about this. When I talk about white liberals being involved in immigration, does anyone know who George Soros is? Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he's a San Francisco liberal. Yeah. What about Alejandro Mayorkas?
Another Jewish.
Yeah. Thank you. Alejandro Mayorkas. Think about him. He's the Department of Homeland Security, has overseen the most porous and wide border in our country's history. Do you know that he was a board member of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society? So again, what Arthur's saying just isn't true, and hey, that's great. Israel does a great job fighting illegal immigration in their country, but when I see IsraAid NGO workers on the shores of Italy and the shores of Greece facilitating the Great Replacement, it makes me absolutely sick. Thank you.
Okay, good guys. So back to more of the nitty gritty on October 7th. So Arthur, we'll go to you. How would you describe Israel's response to October 7th? Was it proportionate? Was it disproportionate? Was it underwhelming? Tell us.
In a way, I would have to say it's underwhelming, Because if I had my way, you know, I would be full stop nothing. Israel does a much better job. I'm glad that they're glad that I'm not in charge of the IDF. It would have been a lot more, just kill as many terrorists as you can and double take the hindmost. Israel goes through a 4-point process before they target any area so that civilians do not get killed. Further proof, because we're going to hear all this genocide talk, that they're deliberately attacking the so-called Palestinians. Well, please explain to me then why Israel targeted terrorists in Lebanon going after their pagers and their smartphones. Rather than just dropping bombs indiscriminately, they targeted the terrorists specifically because they don't want to kill a bunch of civilians. They're far more generous than I am. They're far more generous than a lot of the Muslims are. Rawaf al-Sa'im, independent blogger in Saudi Arabia. You know what he said? Bibi, you're a coward. You should have blown them all up. That's a Muslim in Saudi Arabia. I don't agree with that. Yeah. Aren't you glad that I'm not in charge of the IDF? I'm glad the IDF, they are very precise. They take their time. When children are sick and they need blood transfers, guess what? They're able to get out of Gaza and go to an Israeli hospital. But if I was a Jew in Gaza, I'm dead already. I don't exist. If I'm a Christian, I gotta hide it and put the cross away. Or I'll take a picture next to a Christmas tree with a bunch of terrorists on it, and I'll pander. That's a real problem. And how much time do I have?
39 seconds.
39 seconds. We're talking about I feel it's been proportionate on an international level. They have gone above and beyond. The civilian death rate is 2 to 1 and almost 1 to 1. He talked about Hamas numbers. Hamas has had to change their numbers over and over. I don't care what France 24 says, because their president is totally in the pocket and totally supporting the Islamic movement. Give me a break.
Okay, all right. So, Nick, it's your turn here. How would you describe Israel's response, Nick, to October 7th? Proportionate, disproportionate, or underwhelming?
I would describe Israel's response to October 7, 2023 as wildly disproportionate, and I would say that it easily constitutes the worst genocide of the 21st century thus far. Let's look at some numbers here. When you look at, for example, some of the agencies that are tracking the conflict, such as the Gaza Ministry of Health, and these are some of the most conservative numbers in the conflict, they have found that over 42,000 Palestinians have been killed. 17,000 are children. 17,000 are children. 10,000 are missing. 100,000 are injured. 10,000 are missing. Arthur also mentioned that in Gaza, there's, Christians have to hide in fear. Has anyone ever heard of Reverend Luther Isaac? Yes, he's a Lutheran priest who operates in Gaza. And actually, there was the St. Porphyrius Church. Has anyone ever heard of that? It's one of the most long-lasting Orthodox churches in the world. It was actually targeted for destruction along with 378 mosques by the IDF during their campaign in Gaza. So again, we see the wanton destruction of civilians. We see, the wanton destruction of civilian sites and religious sites. We see the wanton targeting of women and children. And on that note too, according to UNRWA, I'm sure most of the people here are pro-life, I would assume so. Over 155,000 pregnant Palestinian mothers are under the threat of malnutrition without access to medical supplies. So this is just totally ridiculous. And I guess the final thing I'll talk about when you look at the Israeli response to October 7th, one of the most egregious things they've done has been the targeting of diplomatic facilities. Israel attacked a diplomatic embassy in a third party, a neutral nation, Syria, and killed a member of the foreign military that wasn't participating, Mohammed Reza Zahedi of the IRGC. So this is how Israel's acting. They're expanding the scope of the conflict. They're targeting women and children. They're targeting civilians. They're targeting religious sites. It's been totally disproportionate. Thank you.
Okay.
Of course. Okay, so we got one. Okay, here we go. They don't deliberately target. That canard is repeated over and over. The civilian to military ratio is much smaller than it would be. 10,000 civilians to 1 died in the ISIS conflict. So that is an absolute lie. Muslim military leaders, they don't have clean hands in this at all. Bashar al-Assad is a big part of the problem. So as far as the churches being bombed, some of these churches are hiding weapons. Okay, they're part of the conflict. And the same thing is true for the mosques. So don't give me this garbage that they're innocent. So there's that. All this talk about innocent women and children. Yeah, you know what? Hamas needs to stop because they put them in harm's way. They deliberately put their weapons in civilian areas, in hospitals, in schools, so that the kids get killed, so that they can virtue signal to the world. Israel's killing innocent people because Hamas deliberately puts them in harm's way.
Okay,
Can
you
I-
want to rebut?
Yeah, can I rebut? So I think one of the things that's important to look at, when you consider, they're putting weapons in schools and all these things. Again, where is this information coming from? This is coming from Zionists.
Documentary information.
Quiet, please.
Documentary
Quiet, please.
information.
Quiet, please.
Okay.
Can I
Please
restart?
give me.
Can I
Yeah, so
restart? my
restart
time?
the clock.
We have a Q&A, sir. You can ask then, okay?
Where is Kim?
Silence!
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so repeat the question, Lawrence, and I think we'll restart the time.
Okay, so, well, it was a rebuttal to how would you describe Israel's response to October 7th?
Yeah, that's right, my bad. Okay, so, yeah, so, well,
So you were just in a rebuttal?
yeah, we're in a rebuttal, yeah, so like kind of talking about, they're being innocent, aside from Israel wantonly targeting civilians, they've also used white phosphorus in this conflict on several times. White phosphorus is an internationally recognized banned substance according to the Geneva Convention. So I know maybe people in Lebanon, the little villagers in Lebanon where they bombed them, maybe they were, hiding weapons under their donkey cart or something. I don't know, but I doubt that was the case. And secondly, one of the things I think that's really grotesque is, Jews consider themselves people of the book. That's what they call themselves. But if you look at this conflict, 70% of the educational facilities, according to an ABC News report, have been destroyed in Gaza. So after the war, how are the Gazans going to be able to educate themselves? How are they going to be able to better their lives while they're living in rubble and dirt? They won't be able to. So it's totally disgusting. So that's my rebuttal. Thank you.
Okay, good. So moving on. All right, so we're now going to kind of go back to the United States a little bit. So we'll start with you, Arthur. Arthur, do you believe the various college campus protest encampments we have seen since the conflict started are in accordance with First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and expression?
Okay, not if they block pathways, not if they violate time, place, and manner restrictions. I don't think any of us would like somebody blaring on a bullhorn at 10 o'clock at night. That's a manner and a time restriction. We have seen some of these so-called Palestinian protests. They block the public square. They do not allow students to go back and forth. They attack students. That is not acceptable. Your freedom of speech does not get to impede my freedom of travel, my freedom of movement, my freedom of speech. Some cities, they have stricter guidelines. You have to keep moving. You can't plant yourself in one place. You can't set up a barricade. You can't set up an encampment. That is not acceptable, and all of that should be cleared up. You don't get to attack people. You don't get to block people. We have seen it on camera, these so-called pro-Palestinian protesters violating the rights of others. Jew, Gentile, Muslim, Christian, you pick. They violated their rights. You want to say, go Palestine, you're welcome to do it. You gotta respect time, place, and manner restrictions. And we have not seen that happening. In fact, we see Jewish college professors, they're not allowed to come on the campus because they're afraid for their safety. There was one Jewish professor in Columbia, could not get in the campus. We're afraid for your safety. Excuse me? How about getting rid of the violent protesters? You had other Jewish students who had to run for their lives into a library because of these so-called protesters. They were perpetrating violence and they wanted to hurt people. There is no excuse for that. None. You can have your freedom of speech, but you don't get to hurt my rights, my body, my property. There has to be a respect for time, place, and manner restrictions. When that doesn't happen, you shut them down. That is appropriate. I would go a step further. People who organize this stuff, expel them because they deliberately not only violate the norms on the campuses, but they violate the rights of other students. Like I said, you want to wear the flag, go Palestine, no such thing, whatever, but you don't get to violate my rights to do it. And you don't get to attack Jewish people or Christian people or anybody and scare them so they have to run and hide in a library to be safe.
Okay. All right, so Nick, do you believe the various college campus encampments we have seen since the conflict started are in accordance with our First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and expression?
Yes, I absolutely do. I'm a free speech absolutist, and if you look at what our First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law, among other things, abridging the right to freedom of speech or the press. Okay, if you look at these college students, we have a very long history in this country of supporting conscientious objectors, truth tellers, and those who are willing to speak out on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves. And if you look at across American history, even in recent history, you've seen protesters who, I would argue, were far more violent than these students who are just basically having drum circles on American college campuses. And they've been celebrated by the media. One example is the 1960 Vietnam War demonstrations. You see people making movies about that, the media celebrating these people. They're basically hailed as American heroes. How are the Palestinian protesters any different than them? If you look at also another point of contact in the 1980s, American college students were absolutely crucial in protesting apartheid South Africa. They were, again, celebrated by both political parties. They were celebrated by the American media. They were celebrated by, Hollywood. Why is their actions or their choices any different than those who are protesting for Palestine? I also want to point something out. I don't know if you know this. We have the First Amendment in this country, like I mentioned. There are 38 states, whether through executive action or legislative action, that have greatly prohibited, limited, or outright banned activities by the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, which calls for divesting from Israel as a form of political protest. If you look at, for example, in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis, who Art was a supporter of, they passed HB 269, which basically is hate speech laws. If you offend the sensibilities of Jews in Florida, they can basically have you arrested. Look it up, HB 269. So these are important things we have to consider. And again, I think that the Palestinian students who are participating in these movements are doing nothing more than falling within the confines of their First Amendment rights. And I believe that they are free speech heroes, and I stand with them, and I'm proud to have gone to some of these encampments. Thank you.
Okay, rebuttal. I want you to notice not once did he address the issue of people being blocked, people being harassed, not people not being allowed to go from point A to point B, because that's the real issue here. I don't have a problem with people. If you get a permit and you're allowed to, type, place, and manner restrictions. We can't have everybody setting up a encampment because then nobody would be able to. Just like we can't have everybody doing a parade because then there'd be no traffic. I want you to notice he didn't talk about, is it free speech to scare and attack Jewish students so that they have to run into a library, run into a basement? No, that isn't. And it's all being covered up under protest. At this point, does he also support the George Floyd riots? Those were mostly peaceful, except they were burning police stations and they were attacking people. That's not freedom of speech. And what you saw, a lot of these protests were violating people's rights, violating people's property, and he did not address that at all. Okay, and you're going to see a lot of that. I've talked about how the Palestinians are not targeted. He'll say otherwise. I put up something he doesn't even respond with. You'll see that.
So can I rebut that? Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the first on the BLM versus pro-Palestine, I don't know, has anyone seen Palestinian protesters burning down the city of Minneapolis? Oh, that's weird. I don't know. But anyways, and also, I want to talk about this too, free speech. So, you have, I guess Jewish students going and crying in the library because someone said something mean to them. I can't imagine how the Palestinian child who just got his leg blown off on the beaches of Gaza must feel about that. I mean, give me a break. This is just totally ridiculous. You know what? Safe colleges, you know who's really hard on college campuses? You know what college campuses are really hard on? Apologies? White men. Where was Bill Ackman and all these Jewish billionaires putting in the speech codes to help protect us when they were attacking us with DEI classes? And also, you want to talk about these protesters. I saw Palestinian protesters get beat up by Zionist thugs at UCLA, sponsored by Bill Ackman. They had a GoFundMe that raised $10,000 for these cowards, these people who probably shot and killed Palestinian children, and then they're coming back here without any punishment. They're cowards, and if I ever saw them, they wouldn't be able to do that to me. Let me make that clear. Thank you.
So, hey everybody, and we appreciate you, we appreciate your appreciation, but we're gonna just skip the clapping because then we're gonna try to move through this. We've been through 5 questions. These guys have done a great job. 5 more. And so we're gonna come back. Oh, is there another rebuttal?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm just partying.
Okay, yeah. So Arthur, the next question is for you. Should political candidates who have served in foreign militaries like the IDF, such as Representative Brian Mast of Florida and Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, be allowed to hold political office in the United States?
It depends on which foreign government they were working for and when. Y'all know Dana Rohrabacher, don't you? God bless him, my favorite. I was sad when he lost. Did you know he fought with the Taliban against the Soviets, early 1980s? We were not against the Taliban at the time. I would not want to keep Dana Rohrabacher out of Congress, because at the time we were not at war with the Taliban. Same thing goes with Josh Shapiro, Brian Mast. That's fine, you served in the IDF, thank you for your service. Now I want to take it a step further. Brian Mast walks around in his uniform. Truth be told, I was offended. Excuse me, this is America. You shouldn't be wearing a foreign uniform. But step back, he has his First Amendment rights. Fair enough, Keith and I were actually talking about this. So I decided, here's the deal. You're a member of Congress. When you're on the floor of that House or Senate, you represent me. You represent the Constitution. You don't wear a uniform. You don't get to wear a hijab, Miss Omar. I wouldn't let her wear that. I would say to the Jewish members, no kippahs. That's true, and the Jewish members don't wear kippahs. You can wear a cross, you can wear a crescent, you can wear a Star of David because it's not ostentatious. But you're on that floor, you represent our Constitution. So no uniform. So that's my rule. I want to take it a step further. I would also say, the bigger premise here, of course, is that Israel's an enemy. Israel is undermining us. They steal our secrets. Well, we steal from them. This guy forgot to mention the USS Liberty. Why? Isn't that interesting? I'll tell you why. Because the USS Liberty was spying on them. Nobody talks about that for some strange reason. Interesting. We spy on them, they spy on us. That's the way the world works. Hey, the WikiLeaks cables expose there's a lot of this crap going on. The fact is, Israel is not an apartheid state or an enemy. I'm glad they're an ally. I'm glad for Josh Shapiro probably should have stayed there. He would have done more service to us. But I'm glad Brian Mast is here. That's my statement on the matter. No uniforms on the floor. Wear and wear roses. There you go.
Okay, thank you. And so, Nick, how about you? Should political candidates who have served in foreign militaries like the IDF, such as Representative Brian Mast of Florida and Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, should they be allowed to hold political office in the United States?
No, I don't think they should. And I actually would agree with Arthur. That's a good point he made about Dana Rohrabacher and fighting with the Mujahideen against the communists. And it's a pretty interesting point. But I think the difference with the Taliban is, can anyone tell me about the Taliban American Political Action Committee? Is that around? Oh. Does the Taliban put billions of dollars into our electoral races and our congressional races, influencing the outcome of those events every election cycle? Is there a network or myriad of lobby groups that advocate on behalf of Afghanis, and particularly Pashtuns, and on behalf of the Taliban? Can anyone? Okay, that's weird. So I don't see that, but again, I'll give that to you. I don't think Dana Rohrabacher should be able to serve under light of that, and I would say that. So back to Brian Mast, Josh Shapiro, anyone who serves in a foreign military, they should not be allowed to hold office in the United States. And I would go further. I would believe that dual citizenship should be ended in the United States. You cannot be a dual citizen. I mean, look, you go to China, you can't be a dual citizen there. There's only actually a handful of countries that don't allow dual citizenship in the world. And it's interesting because whenever this issue comes up, only one group that gets offended about ending dual citizenship. I'll let you think of who that is. But, I think it's kind of interesting. We have all of these people. It's no problem that people can go serve in a foreign military. I mean, could you imagine the uproar if someone had, maybe had even just a relative who was fighting for the Palestinian resistance that was in Congress? That person would be censured, they'd be removed. But, Brian Mast can go around in his IDF uniform and people can call him brave and all these things. It's just totally ridiculous. And I guess I'll end on this point. If Israel's an ally and they're such good friends of ours, why did a 2004 Government Accountability Office, that's the GAO, that looks over our congressional budget every year, they found that Israel conducted the most aggressive foreign policy espionage operation of any ally in our country. So again, I don't think people who serve in the IDF should serve in our government, serve in office. They're not loyal, they're compromised. Thank you.
Oh gosh, I wish I'd had the pen at the ready. There was some really good stuff there. Okay, first thing, I agree, no dual citizenship. I agree with that. I voted for Tom Tancredo. How many of you remember him in 2008? I was Trump before you were Trump, with all due respect. He wanted a wall before the rest of you did. I'm kidding. Some of you were probably way ahead of me. He said no more dual citizenship. It's not just Jews, by the way. There are West Africans that they want to have dual citizenship because it's easier to do business, because other countries do respect their sovereignty, and I do agree with that. Regarding the money, the top 10 countries that flood our Congress with money, Israel doesn't even make the top 10. As far as AIPAC, Zionists of America, they're American citizens, it's their money, they have a right to spend it as they please. I will say this, if there is Israeli foreigners involved, jail time. I'm okay with that. Sure.
Okay.
Can I offer a rebuttal to that too?
Yeah.
I guess I didn't, we're talking about people with dual loyalties. I guess that's a broader question, or if they're serving in a foreign army. But I think something that's interesting here to bring up, Israel's relationship. Has anyone here ever heard of Jeffrey Epstein? Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein actually had a very close relationship with Ehud Barak. He was a former Israeli prime minister in the mid-2000s. His partner was Ghislaine Maxwell. Has anyone heard of this woman?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know who her father was? Robert Maxwell.
Sorry.
Do you know he received a state funeral in Israel, despite the fact that he lived his whole life in the United Kingdom? And when he died, the prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin, who had signed the Oslo Accords, said he has done more for us than Israel can ever admit. So, again, when we're talking about intelligence and compromise and things like that, these are very things we need to worry about, because basically Jeffrey Epstein was probably a Mossad agent working in our country and blackmailing politicians to have them vote for war. So again, I am very wary of anyone who's working on behalf of Israel, has strong Israeli associations, serving in our government, serving in our military, anything of that nature. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so moving on. Good job, guys. All right, this one looks kind of short and sweet, but we'll see. So Arthur, we'll go to you first. What is your view on the Israeli settlements in the West Bank? Fair or foul?
We need more of them.
Okay.
Because that's what I said. I think that Israel should take over. Stop with this namby-pamby nonsense. I don't agree with Rawaf al-Sayin. I don't believe in dropping bombs and killing everybody. That's outrageous. I do believe look, you've been there for 60 years. All this talk about a Palestinian state as if it's been around for 100 years. That is not true. Yasser Arafat came up with this nonsense. The guy was an Egyptian. He wasn't even a so-called Palestinian. He liked little boys. Maybe he talked about Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe we ought to talk about Yasser Arafat. We ought to talk about all of these Islamic militants. They love kids, really like them. For some reason, we don't talk about that. So there's that issue right there. Arabs would be safer. Muslims would be safer if Israel controlled, Judea and Samaria. Let's get the right name back, please, as well as the Gaza Strip. It's not just Israel that's closing in, it's Egypt. Egypt doesn't want them, Jordan doesn't want them, Syria doesn't want them, Lebanon doesn't want them. There was a majority Christian country, and when the so-called Palestinians came in, what happened? It turned into another basket case. It turned into a foothold for terrorism. You can talk to any Lebanese. You have Lebanese who are grateful that Israel is blowing up those terrorists. The terrorists, not the kids, not the donkeys. They targeted their weaponry. I hope your pager doesn't go off. Remember that joke a few days ago. So there you go. I want to see more settlements. The Arabs would be better off. I think some of those so-called Palestinians would be grateful to have Israel in charge, but they can't say it because they get killed. Yeah, there's no Jews allowed, and Christians, they can't celebrate Christmas anymore because, again, the Muslims decided to take it out on them. Let's see. I'll go back to a few other things. He didn't mention Jonathan Pollard. I was very angry when that happened. You told me about that. I can criticize Israel. Why didn't you mention him? Because Donald Trump pardoned him. Which is one reason why I supported DeSantis. And regarding the 246 bill, it's a property right. That's all that it is. I want to go back to some other stuff. Am I done? Or
Yeah, done.
So we talked about that issue. And Epstein, what? Come on. Israel, thank you for killing terrorists. Epstein, he's dead, and we got to get rid of all those other politicians on both sides of the Atlantic who were sleeping with his people. Okay.
Okay, so Nick, what is your view on the Israeli settlements in the West Bank? Fair or foul?
Yeah, so I believe that every Israeli settlement in the West Bank needs to be dismantled and all Jews return to Israel. They need to leave the West Bank. And if you look at this problem of Israeli settlements, this is an ongoing issue. This is almost actually ongoing for 60 years. And we have to look at where this started. It started with the Six-Day War of 1967. In the Six-Day War, people like Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, people who are heroes of the IDF, basically saw an opportunity to complete the ethnic cleansing that was started in 1948 and secure Eretz Israel. So in moving along that timeline, they went and committed a preemptive military strike on the combined air forces of Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Syria. June 5th, 1967 makes October 7th, 2023 look like child's play. Okay, and if you look at what happened too, not only that, they also launched concurrent ground invasions of Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula. So that was, it was a very wide-ranging operation, totally ridiculous. After the conflict, the United Nations Security Council, which is comprised of, the United States, China, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, basically passed Security Council Resolution 242. In that Security Council resolution, it called for the withdrawal of Israel from all of its occupied territories. And what's interesting about the Security Council resolution, if you follow the United Nations, this was one of the few Security Council resolutions that the United States, the patron of Israel, not its client, the patron who gives it money, funds it, keeps it alive, did not veto. And they worked in defiance of our expectations. They worked in defiance of the expectations of the world. They still occupy the West Bank. They still occupy the Golan Heights. I disagree. Ariel Sharon tactically withdrew from the Gaza Strip because one of the reasons, if you look at early Zionist writings, there's always two problems: demography versus land. How much land can we take in without threatening the Jewish majority? They withdrew from Gaza because they knew that the Gazans were more fertile. They would eventually outbreed them. So they decided to focus their efforts on the West Bank. Thank you.
I don't need to respond to that. I want to hear questions.
No.
Next question, please.
No, we're not Q&A yet, guys.
Next
Oh, okay,
question
so
for you.
we're moving on?
Yeah.
Alrighty. All right, next question for Arthur first. Do Palestinians displaced abroad have the right to return home? Yes or no?
Gosh, why don't you ask them? They've been offered a state 5 times. I'm going to say 5 a lot. They were offered a state, and they said no. Second of all, I reject the premise of your question. If you want to talk about Palestinians, you got to talk about Golda Meir, Menachem Begin. They were Palestinians. The real Palestinian flag is not that 4-colored knockoff that's a ripoff from the other Arab countries. There was a Union Jack with a circle that said Palestine. You want to talk about Palestine? You better talk about the Jews who were there. Anything else? We're talking Neo-Palestinian or some other fanciful fiction. They had a state, Jordan, the Peel Commission, 1937. You can have Beersheba too. The Jews would get Jerusalem, Haifa, and Tel Aviv. Really small with the British in the middle. Much less than the Jews ultimately got. And the so-called Palestinians, the West Bank residents and the Gazans, they don't want a second state. They want one state with no Jews. You can ask any of them. People have to pretend to not be Jewish to go into the West Bank. And they interview these individuals, and they say, no, we don't want a 2-state solution. We want one, and no Jews. So the problem is back on them. And right to return, that's ridiculous. I'm of German descent. Prussian descent. There is no Prussia. I'd have to go to Poland. I'd have to pay the taxes. There's no right to return for anybody. Unless we're going to start having those brown Nazis, like Nowley and all of his brown Nazi people wanting to push us and say, you're on stolen land. It's not stolen land. This was conquered land or settled land. And the same is true for Israel. 3 wars, 48, 67, 73. Israel won. Why is it that the winner has to give land back? What is this? Why is it that Israel has to give land back? This is ridiculous. And as I said before,
15 seconds.
what's going on here? 5 times. They said no. They literally rejected. They don't want a state. The whole concept of Palestinian today is a negative identity. Destroy Jews, destroy Israel. Once Jews and Israel are gone, they'll start killing each other. Palestinian will be a byword.
Okay. So Nick,
Yes.
do Palestinians who are displaced abroad have the right to return home? Yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely. The Palestinians have the right to return home from abroad. First, again, understanding the history of the conflict is important. When you look at the 1948 Arab-Israel War, I'd like to point out that, first off, and this is agreed by historians on far sides of the political spectrum, such as Ilan Papp or Benny Morris. Benny Morris is a Zionist. Ilan Papp is an anti-Zionist. There is no historical or documentary evidence to suggest that the Palestinians left their homes willingly in 1948. The war of 1948 was a Arab war or was a Jewish war of ethnic cleansing. Prior, basically when the British Mandate withdrew in 1947, there was a low-level simmering civil war in which the Zionists actually successfully ethnically cleansed urban centers such as Acre, West Jerusalem, and Jaffa. This is prior to the war. Also prior to the war breaking out, there was a massacre at a place called Deir Yassin in April 1948, which was followed by other episodes of Zionist ethnic cleansing that happened previously in February 1948. So, despite the Zionists saying that the Arabs marched on them just because simply they declared their independence, that's not true. There was serious ethnic cleansing going on against the Palestinians. The Arabs went in to defend them. Now, if we look at this right of return, it's interesting. You know who has a right of return? Jews, right? They have the Aliyah. So how is it that someone from Brooklyn or Boca Raton, a diamond dealer, a landlord perhaps, how could they show up in Jerusalem and steal someone's home? But then Palestinians living over in Lebanon can't come back from can't come back from refugee camps across the border. It's totally ridiculous. And you want to say, this is interesting too, you keep saying the so-called Palestinians. What about the so-called Israelis? Where was Golda Meir born? Kiev. Where did she grow up? Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Interesting. So again, some things to point out, but again, Palestinians absolutely have the right to return home, and they should be allowed to return home. And this situation where they're just displaced and they have to languish in refugee camps, like places like Sabrat and Shatila, where in 1982 Ariel Sharon massacred these people. So yeah, again, totally disgusting. They do have the right. Thank you.
Rebuttal. Okay, so they did not leave willingly. 5 Arab states marching into Israel. Yeah, there's going to be some problems. There's your catastrophe. There's your Nakba. The so-called Palestinians love to scream Nakba, Nakba. There was a catastrophe because it started with them. Like I said, Peel Commission, he hasn't responded to that for some reason, because Israel said we'll take less. The Jews, they came legally, they paid for the land. In fact, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem told all the local landlords or the owners, you better sell me your land quick, because those Jews are going to kill you. Which didn't happen, by the way, so the Grand Mufti turns around, jacks up the price, and made lots of money off the Jews. Usually it's the Jews that are accused of being money grubbing, but you have here this Muslim leader. And here we go again, the canard, Palestinian. They didn't talk about a Palestinian state. This was a fiction that came up in 1967. Do you see how the game is played? This false term coming in again. Where are we?
10 seconds.
Let's see, Aliyah. Jews, they come legally, they pay to be there. It was supposed to be a Jewish state. Jews have been there for 3,000 years, but every time they've come, they've paid for it. They don't steal it, they don't push people into the sea.
So can I rebut that?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting because actually if you look at a source, I recommend everyone to go look at the source. Feel free to look me up, quote me on it. The Jewish Virtual Library. And it says in the Jewish Virtual Library, this isn't coming from, Nick Taurus's hate facts, it's coming from the Jewish Virtual Library. It says that during the first Aliyah, do you know that most of those migrants who came were actually illegal migrants? They were actually coming in defiance of Ottoman laws, which said the Ottomans were very kind. They said, hey, we have those pogroms in Tsarist Russia. You're welcome to come and settle here. You just can't settle in Palestine with the Arabs. It would be basically it would cause too much social discord. But again, they violated that. They violated it in 1882. They violated it in the early 1900s when people like Jabotinsky and Ben Gurion came to the country during the second Aliyah, during 1903 to 1914. So again, Jews did not come legally. Actually, they came illegally at the behest of foreign Jewish groups sending them there, and the authorities were doing it in defiance of the people who live there. Who does this sound like today?
Time.
Exactly, thank you.
Okay, so moving on. All right, we're doing good here, folks. Next question for you, Arthur. How would you describe the Palestinian nation? Historical myth or rooted in reality?
Myth, astroturf, propped up. I mentioned Yasser Arafat, he came up with this. The idea of a Palestinian state started getting bandied about after 1967. Before that, you talk about 1948, you have Jordan, you have Israel. There was your two-state solution. You know what? It's an interesting chant when people will say, no such thing as Palestine. Today, that's true, because it became Israel. I'll go back to square one. Every one of those Jewish settlers were Palestinians. Yes, they were. Golda Meir was a Palestinian. David Ben Gurion was a Palestinian. Menachem Begin was a Palestinian. The so-called Palestinian movement today has a serious problem. You want a Palestinian state? There already was one. Mandatory Palestine. It was a green passport. It existed. Now it doesn't anymore. It's Israel. So you can talk about neo-Palestinian, but it's a made-up term. And I'll go right back to square one. Arab states don't care, and they don't want the so-called Palestinian refugees in Gaza or the West Bank. They don't want it. They don't care for it. This isn't me talking. This is Saudis talking. I don't care how rich or poor they may be. I can tell you the Lebanese Christians, what few there are in, don't want them. Kuwait didn't want them. Black November of 1970, so-called Palestinians dressed up like Iraqis, and they invaded Iraq in 1991. They've caused trouble wherever they go. Entitlement, attitude. They've gotten 10 times as much money as Europe did after World War II. And what happens with the money? It props up these rich terrorists who live in Qatar, and they let their people struggle and starve and die. Even these leaders don't believe in a Palestinian state. They just believe in themselves, and they believe in their jihad. This is a total myth. It's a total fraud. This is just another buildup from Occupy movement, Black Lives Matter, and then Palestinian nonsense. All of this is just a bunch of rich liberals who are empty and have nothing to live for, so they glom onto this issue. They're more pro-Palestinian than the Arabs are.
Time.
Okay. Nick, How would you describe the Palestinian nation? Historical myth or rooted in reality?
Well, the historicity of the Palestinian state is absolutely undeniable for anyone who has a slight modicum of knowledge on the conflict. Let's look at some points of contact here. From the year 133 to the year 1948, a span of 1,815 years, the land that we know as Palestine was exclusively referred to as such, okay? Next, we also have to look at what was happening during the Ottoman period. In 1872, the Ottomans created the Sanjak of Jerusalem, which was a consolidation of the provinces of South Beirut, Nablus, and Jerusalem into a cohesive geopolitical space that we know as Palestine today. This space was bordered by the river Litani in the north, the Jordan River in the east, and the Mediterranean covering its western flank. And the people that lived between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea are known as what? Palestinians. This is undeniable. This is seen in history. And historian Ilan Papp, who again is a great historian, I highly recommend you read him, he discusses that when this came about in 1872, again, I've already mentioned that people were familiar with what Palestine was for over 1,800 years, but this modern, coherent geopolitical space of Palestine came into being with the Sanjak of Jerusalem. And, you know, like I mentioned, they had a kind of coherent space, but Ilan Papp talks about how these people had a distinct folklore, distinct customs, distinct language, distinct traditions. Again, all things that qualify the markers of a people, okay? These are important things to point out. And I guess, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, good. So,
Okay, just a couple of points I forgot to add. The very term Palestine is a corruption of the term Philistine.
That's what I
This is a foreign imposition. The Romans put it there. It wasn't called Palestine before, this 130 nonsense. It was Syria Palestina, actually. Okay, the Romans imposed it, then the Ottomans imposed their term. That region has been overrun by many people groups, the Ottomans, the Turkmens, the Mongols. They were in that area at one time. They didn't stay around that much. The Egyptians were there too. There's been massive people movement. The notion that you had Arabs there the whole time is nonsensical. Many of the Arab populations were nomadic. You can look up Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, reading about that matter. They were nomadic, they moved around predominantly, and the people who owned the land in the 1870s and afterward were mostly absentee landlords. Like I said, a lot of them sold out to the Grand Mufti, lied to them, and then jacked up the price and sold it to the Zionist settlers who came. The idea that they were illegal is preposterous, considering the fact that hardly anybody lived there. It was a backwater, abandoned.
Okay.
Prophecies are fulfilled because Jews are there.
Can I rebut that?
Okay, one
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I wanted to talk about that too, but I'm kind of getting jumbled up. But, again, looking at Philistines, it happened after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, where the Jews were basically expelled from Palestine by the Emperor Hadrian. And Arthur is right. There were a host of other leaders and rulers, the Ottomans, the Mongols prior to that. And prior to the Mongols, you had the Abbasids, the Umayyads, various Muslim caliphates. And again, Arthur is right. Arabs are nomadic. They did come out of the Arabian Peninsula in the year around shortly after Muhammad's death, if I remember my Islamic historiography, when they started invading during the Rashidun, the four rightly guided caliphs. But nonetheless, in that time with all that change of hands, all those transfers, that region remained majority Arab Muslim with a tiny Christian minority. And according to records of when the Jews started arriving in 1882 during the first Aliyah, Ottoman Palestine is only 2 to 5% Jewish. So again, you have this 1,800-year span where it's known exclusively as Palestine.
Time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're done there. We're gonna move on to the next question.
We're almost done here, man. Almost done. Almost the Q&A.
Good.
We'll go to you first, Arthur.
You know what? I don't mind foregoing it.
No, we're gonna finish the program. We're
No,
gonna
we
finish the
have-
program.
yeah, we
We
have
have
a-
a program here. We have a program.
We have a program, we're good on time, we're gonna stick with the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so Arthur, who would you describe as the rogue state in the Middle East? Would that be Iran or Israel?
Yeah, it's Iran. They're the ones propping up all the terrorists. They're the ones that are funneling goods, money to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Alliance, Islamic Jihad. They're the ones that are propping up this. They are motivated by an eschatological, that's the term I needed last year, an eschatological vision. Wipe out the Jews so that the Mahdi returns. This is clearly a religious conflict. It's Iran. Now, that doesn't mean that I respect Pat Buchanan. I don't think American boots need to be on the ground. I think Israel can do a great job taking care of Iran. And they don't even need our money to do it. Well, let's see. Looking up I think Syria's too busy with civil wars. Gaddafi's gone. He was a Jew, by the way. Nobody talks about that. And then they got rid of him. So much for the cultural critique. But at any rate, Iran's the big issue. Hamas is also the big issue. Shame on these people. I'm glad that Israel blows up these terrorists. I'm glad they killed them. We heard all the stuff about the girls and the pregnant women that get killed. Again, they're put in harm's way. Also, sadly, there is collateral damage when you are trying to wipe out terrorists. That is a reality. And I can tell you that when Hamas invaded, when they crossed the border and they went after those civilians, they went after people who weren't fighting, who weren't on a war footing. Many of them were foreigners and some of them were Americans. If you're America first, I don't know how you can support Hamas that kills Americans, whether they were there for a long time or they were just visiting. There's no excuse for this. Iran's the enemy, Hamas is the enemy. I can't wait for them to be destroyed, and it can be done. Israel's doing a great job targeting terrorists, avoiding civilians as best as they can, whereas Islamic militants don't care how many people they kill Muslims. I am so tired of that not being talked about. And you have people in the Gaza Strip who are finally speaking out and saying, Hamas is doing this, it's their fault. There was this beautiful lady, she's probably dead now. Hamas steals from us. Hamas puts us in danger. They're them in Iran. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Nick, so who would you describe as the rogue state in the Middle East, Iran or Israel?
Again, well, I would describe it as Israel. When we look at, how we describe a rogue state, states that threaten global peace and the international order, I'd say there's three key metrics that we need to look at. One, adherence to international law. Two, treatment of national minorities. And three, treatment of neighbors and allies. So let's look at the first one, adherence to international law. I kind of mentioned this earlier. Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal, which is illegal. Israel is a non-signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact. You know who actually did sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact? The Shah of Iran, and the Islamic Republic of Iran has maintained it up through the day. They're still a signatory. Israel, on the other hand, is a non-signatory along with the likes of India, North Korea, all these countries without sanctioned nuclear programs. So I think that should be pointed out. They're probably in the most egregious defiance of international law, I would say. Second, treatment of national minorities. Look at how they're treating the Palestinians. Like I mentioned the other day, who they're targeting in this war are the most vulnerable elements of Palestinian society. Like I cited earlier, 155,000 pregnant mothers, according to UNRWA, have no access to medical facilities and face the threat of nutrition. Over 17,000 Palestinian children have been killed. All of their schools have been destroyed. Churches have been destroyed. It's totally ridiculous. Next, let's talk about the treatment of neighbors and allies. Look how they're treating the United States. Thank you, Arthur, for bringing up Jonathan Pollard, a man who spied on our country and then received a tarmac welcome from Benjamin Netanyahu. Look, I'm a proud Trump supporter. I don't agree with all aspects of his foreign policy, but, hey, that was his decision. But I'm going to say this, too. When we look at actually, I'll just end it there. Thank you. But can I rebut some of the things he said?
Sure.
Okay, is that okay, Art?
That's if I rebut, and I don't want to. I want questions.
Well,
that was the last one, right?
We're going to get to that,
Yeah,
Arthur.
Is this number 10? Was this number 10?
Oh, Arthur, hey, hold on. This is our
We're
This is
on
our
course.
event.
We are on course.
Interesting.
We are on course.
We can't, wait a minute.
We are on course.
Answer my question, please. Was that question number 10? Yes
No,
or
it wasn't. It was not.
No, it wasn't.
Okay, I'm not rebutting. The deal was if I don't rebut, you don't rebut.
So
We're on course,
We're on
Arthur.
course.
I don't
If
care.
you let
It's
us
all right.
finish-
It's okay. It's okay.
Next question.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's Zionists need the guardrails. It's okay. When you can't defend something, you need the guardrails.
So
Is
are we
this
done
out of
with this
place? Are we gonna
Next
have
question.
to-
Next question.
Okay, so,
Was that number 10 or what?
No, it wasn't.
so are we done with this question?
Yes, we are.
Okay, all right. Okay, so that concludes the question portion of the
Thank
debate.
you.
So let's give a round of applause for them. So now what we're gonna do is you're gonna raise your hand, you're gonna ask a question, you can direct it to Arthur, you can direct it to Nick, but both of them are gonna have a chance to answer that question, right?
And what's the time limit?
We still have time. We have 30
Yeah, so
minutes.
we're actually pretty good on time.
Just one more.
But I
So
need
like,
them.
we have timekeepers,
30
we're on
seconds.
course,
And for
we have
us,
a program,
2 minutes.
and so, we're good on time. It's not even 8:30.
I'm gonna grab a drink real quick. if that's
All right, so everybody take a breather, pat yourself on the back.
I want you to notice how he kept debating. I don't
No,
have
no,
to.
Arthur.
I just
no,
noticed
Arthur,
that.
Arthur,
You
that's
spoke out
not
of turn
fair.
too, buddy.
No, that's not fair.
It's not fair. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Do you get
Okay.
multiple questions?
Interesting.
See
that?
You go one question per,
That's
tell
why I tell
everybody gets
people
a
that
chance to ask. Then-
Well, yeah, people are gonna raise their hand and I'm gonna.
How do we have a line?
I'm gonna pick on
You
what?
can ask more than one question.
All right, so, actually, hold on here. So let's do it. Okay, Lawrence and Joe, pick whoever asks the questions, and then and if you'd like to ask, make sure you know we pick everyone. Everyone, keep your hands up, and yeah. So anyways, let's continue. Let's start the Q&A.
Okay, let's go here first.
Me? Okay, Arthur, questions for you, and I'd like you to also
Sure.
address the question. Can you explain to the audience the transfer agreement? How 60,000 of the wealthiest Jews worked with the Nazis to actually be transferred to Palestine? What was that all about?
So I don't have the details on that, but I am aware that there were a lot of Jews that were collaborating.
60,000.
A lot of them collaborated with the Nazis. They ran the ghettos. It was horrible. Do you think that justifies pushing 6 million into ovens and the other 5 million
I don't think the
Slavs
6 million is
and
valid.
Gypsies? Okay, so you understand that. The other thing too, I don't think that delegitimizes Israel as a state because it existed there so that people could go there. They paid to be there. They paid for the land. I've talked about that already.
They paid to move into somebody else's land.
It was mostly an abandoned backwater. That is incorrect. And he made a point about how there was hardly a Jewish population there. That is not true. Go back to Alan Dershowitz, the case for Israel. There was a Jewish population that was present in Jerusalem that whole time. The Ottomans allowed the Jews to be there. Doesn't mean they were great people. The Ottomans did some really nasty stuff to the Spaniards. Thank God that the Spanish got rid of them. So there you go.
Okay, so.
All right, okay, good. And so that was good, good question. You guys debate a little bit there.
That was-
You're gonna,
Oh, sorry.
Say the question again
excuse
too.
me,
Sorry.
and we're gonna go, you get to answer it next.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, the Ottomans actually didn't invade Spain. The invasion of Spain, the conquest of Iberia, happened actually hundreds of years prior to the Ottoman Empire. So just so you guys understand the history here of what he's saying, that's not true. In regards to your question, the Havara Transfer Agreement is what you're referring to. And this is an agreement made with the Nazis, the Third Reich, right? History's ultimate villains. Yeah, this was an agreement they made where Jews were basically allowed to leave the country with their possessions intact, and they were allowed to go to mandatory Palestine. Yeah, so that's what that is. That's what you're referring to as the transfer agreement. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at
Okay,
that.
great question. Anyone else? I think you had your hand up, sir.
My name is Buddha Karim. I'm a founder of Lebanon Peace. Lebanon Peace is a political group. We are aiming to have a peace with Israel. I have to leave the country because I've been talking about peace. I don't need the weapon of Hezbollah in the country.
It's kind of hard to hear you. Would you mind coming up closer, please?
My name is Buddha Khalifi.
Okay, Buddha.
And I'm the owner of Lebanon Peace. Lebanon Peace, it's a political group. We aim to do peace with Israel. And I have to leave the country because I've been talking about the peace. So Hezbollah, they don't like the idea because I don't need your weapon. They don't like me, I
Okay,
can
that's
do
30
peace.
seconds, right?
With Israel. No, it's not a question.
What's your
I'm just
question?
introducing myself so people, they can know what's behind my question.
Okay.
My question is, I was happy when I come to know that there is a war that's going to come in 2022 and it's going to take 70% of the power of Hezbollah and Hamas. The Israeli army are prepared for that because I do believe the Middle East is a better place without those gangsters.
Yes.
But unfortunately now, I'm unhappy because I cannot see war. I can't see a genocide, unfortunately, which is I cannot accept it, or any human, he can accept it. My question for you about the two-state solution. You've been told 5 times, but how about Oslo agreement, which is signed? Isaac Rabin has been assassinated because of that. Okay, and now they denied it, and they tried to kill it by the general plans. Second, the Conference of Madrid also don't. This is the third one. The second one.
This
The
is
third
becoming
one-
a problem.
The
Yeah,
third
it's
one.
only 30
No,
seconds.
no, the third one.
30
The third one.
seconds.
The
Okay,
third
sorry.
one. When everybody
Yeah,
can
no,
know.
I'm sorry. That's it. That's
Okay,
this
so-
is going to be really tough.
Time out.
It's gonna be tough.
So, thank you, sir. Thank you for
Appreciate
introducing
it.
yourself. Those are great questions.
This is what we didn't want.
And yeah, so.
So answer the question.
Okay, so this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be
Well,
able to answer.
why is because that was like a lot of
Yes,
like
it was.
about you and your organization.
Yes, it was. And you know what we're
the question
gonna do?
was kind of buried in there.
Yes, it was.
So
Hold on.
we'll just ask a
Yeah,
question.
ask the
No, my
question.
question was about the two-state.
Okay, so
No.
Yeah,
Okay, so they're gonna answer it. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so.
Okay, what was the question?
The two-state.
Why? I don't know. You were 10 feet away from them.
And I still couldn't because there was a lot of jumbled.
Just give a
This
short
is-
question.
just
You
give
say
it-
what?
We did talk about two-state solution 5 times. they disagree, they deny it.
Yes.
How about Oslo? Why don't speak about it? How about Adi?
Okay, why am I talking about Oslo? Oslo was like a precursor to the other, okay, I'm gonna respond as best as I can with whatever I got out of that. Okay, so I'm gonna just go back to square one, very simple. There have been 5 offers for land. I think Omer, it was in 2008, sorry if I'm getting some of the stuff mixed up. They offered 97% of the pre-1967 border, and the answer was no. The answer was more intifada, the answer was more jihad. Every time Israel wanted to make a deal, the answer was more violence. After the Oslo Accord, there was more violence. That's the problem. Don't put it on Israel. Go back to the so-called Palestinians. Go back to the Arab states.
All right, great. Did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I did. I did. Yeah. So just when you bring up Oslo, I wouldn't even argue that was a good faith agreement for the Palestinians, because if you look at the results of that, look at what's happened to the West Bank. Do you know how the West Bank operates? It's divided into areas A, B, and C, with C comprising over half of the West Bank under direct military occupation of Israel. Areas A and B are basically controlled by settler groups. The Palestinian Authority has some semblance of control there, but in reality they're totally dependent on the Israeli government for their funding and financing. So, and I don't think there's been any fair deal given to the Palestinians during this whole conflict, and that's why this problem keeps going on. So thank you.
Okay, so moving on.
30 seconds, folks.
Hey, so that's the thing. We're looking for questions. If you want to give a speech or give your personal philosophy, you can start your group and rent a room or something. This is a debate. We want questions that are succinct and to the point and fairly short, so that these guys can answer them, not long, multiple, 3-part compound questions, okay? So, go ahead, sir.
The question is for
Nick.
Nick. Well, first of all, thank you very much for participating in the debate.
Thank you for coming.
Have you ever heard of Swedish pastor by the name of Lars Enarsson?
No, I can't say that.
Okay. If you did, then I suggest you read his book. It's called The Truth About Palestine.
Okay.
He is not only a pastor, Christian pastor, but he is also a historian. So he wrote a book, a small book, and he went into great detail, digging out the historical facts. And it's been published, some of his statements in the Wall Street Journal, where I found out about him. So you would give yourself a good faith.
So what's the question?
So he asked
the
you a
book is
question and you
called
said
The
no,
Truth
so.
About Palestine, but he answered my question. He didn't know the person.
Yeah, so you asked the question
Okay,
about
Phil,
answer.
is that
Thank
it?
you, thank you.
Is that the answer?
Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry.
And neither do I.
So,
I don't.
okay,
So,
I think that gentleman over there,
go ahead.
Yes, I'll make it quick and concise. Every nation, I believe, in the world, every nation has a right to sovereignty, its own sovereignty. So my question would be, what form of government would Palestine establish if they had that state, if they had what they wanted, if they actually accepted it? As he said, 5 times they rejected it.
Yeah.
But if something came about that they actually accepted, what form of government would you think would be conducive? Because remember, Israel's the only democracy, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That would be, conducive to, that would be
All right,
shared.
good question. So Nick's gonna answer that first.
Yeah, so I assume, if you're trying to make a point there, maybe perhaps it would be a government based on the Islamic religion, perhaps. There's regions all throughout the region. They have, the separation of church and state is not really something that's in the mind of the people over there. Nothing wrong with that. That's just their civilization. That's how it is. So I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. And there's this whole notion too that, I don't know your political sympathies, but maybe you're a supporter of Israel, which is fine, and I'm glad you're here. But, Israel isn't a secular democracy like they like to claim. If you look at the current ruling coalition, has anyone heard of Bezalel Smotrich? This guy who said the only flag you will see from the river to the sea is blue and white. So how come the Israelis can chant from the river to the sea, talking about, ethnically cleansing Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, but then if some college students chant about it, we have to worry about the feelings of Jewish students. It's totally ridiculous. So again, perhaps they probably would have a government based on the Quran. I don't know. And at the end of the day, those people vote on it, don't they? So they vote on it. That's what they want. I don't think it's in really America's purview to tell people how to run their countries, how to operate. I think that's actually part of the problem with the world right now, is that America's meddling too much in people's affairs. If they wish to have an Islamic government, then good on them. They're Arabs, they're Muslims, that is their faith, that is their culture. And I support the right to achieve their own national destiny as they see fit, without interference from Israel. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, the reason I asked this question is because, you see the relationship with the United States.
Wait. I don't think that's appropriate. No
So,
offense.
yeah, let's,
You asked a question.
that's a good question.
I'm not trying to
It's
disrespect.
Arthur's turn to answer.
He's my friend and I'm playing by the rules here. Okay. So, what kind of a state would be? It's not a hypothetical. Look at Gaza. They already elected a government. Hamas. And they haven't had an election since, have they? What happened to Fatah? What happened to all of the rival political parties? Oh, that's right, they're dead. Why? Hamas killed them. That's what they're going to create. That's why there isn't a central government in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. I want to give it back its original term. That's the kind of government you'll see. You already see it. It ain't the Jews' fault. It's not America's fault. It's not the Europeans' fault. And here we go again. There's this lie that Palestinian is being treated as a modern, real, concrete identity. Notice it said, as Arab, Muslim, he's kind of all over the map. Back to Rawaf al-Saini. The people groups that are in that area. You have Romans, you have Germans, ethnic Germans who are actually in that so-called Palestinian. Romans, Turkmen, Circassians. What are they? But that's why we have this made-up term. And I go back to what I said earlier. The very concept or identity of Neo-Palestinian, I might have to start saying, it's a negative identity. Hatred of Jews, hatred of Israel, get rid of them. Musab Youssef talked about this on Dr. Phil's program. Israel is gone, they'll start killing each other. It's actually happening right now. Sunni and Shia are at it. There is an ongoing civil war in Syria. Alawite, Shiite, against the Sunnis, against the Kurds. And then you have the populations going all over. You won't see a democratic system. Gaza produced one. They elected terrorists. And these terrorists kill their own people. They steal from their own people. That's the government you'll see. Because the whole identity is based on a falsehood. That's the government you'll see. You won't see the Judeo-Christian heritage. You won't see a democratic system. And all the complaints about Israel, I didn't hear the word ethno-state. Isn't that interesting? You want to know why? 20% of the Israelis are Arabs. They have Arab political parties. And the Arabs and those Israeli parties, they lined up behind Netanyahu and supported him.
Too many.
Can I rebut some points?
I don't think we allow rebuttals at this time, do we? I didn't get to rebut him on the other one, did I?
Yeah.
It was back and forth, that's it. Next question.
Okay, Arthur.
So, hey,
this is our
Arthur, you're a debater up here.
Yeah.
And like,
You know what?
You're kind of
And I've seen the
running.
rules getting broken here, and I'm allowed to assert
No,
them.
you haven't.
We're not.
Look at this, everybody.
You have not.
Hey,
So
sir.
chill, be a debater, and now I'm looking
Isn't
for
that
hands.
interesting? They don't keep the rules.
Sir, could I?
Don't disrupt the meeting by accusing me of not sticking to the rules, Arthur. It's a deceptive tactic. Please don't do that here. You're a guest.
War
okay?
by deception, that's Massad's motto, we know that.
Everybody quiet, please. Here, what is your question, sir? Go ahead.
Okay, so this question is to both. You guys believe in Satan? You guys believe in Satan?
Satan?
Satan.
Yes. Hasatan. Okay, can I jump in or did I break the
Yeah,
rules?
I believe
in Satan?
Yes.
Do you want to go first?
Just answer his
You believe
question.
in Satan?
But I want to go further because I get 2 minutes.
Quiet.
Yes,
We want to get his
Arthur.
question out, Arthur.
Okay.
And so that's what I'll do. Is I'll
I
get
thought he
his
finished.
question out.
I thought
You
he
can just
finished.
get quiet and get your answer ready.
I thought he-
That would be great.
I
Thank
thought he
you,
finished.
Arthur.
You guys believe
Okay,
in
so what is
Satan?
your question?
Do you either guys believe in Satan, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, do you believe that there's good people on both sides? There's good people on both sides of this conflict, yes or no?
No, I don't.
You don't think there's good people on the other side? Like Nick saying that there's innocence that's being maybe deceived?
When I'm thinking of sides, I'm thinking of militants fighting. I'm not talking about little
I
children.
totally agree that there's militants on the side, Hamas, you pointed that
Sure.
out. So we know what evil is. We see the face of evil.
Yeah, putting children in front of them.
Correct, so those are the innocents. So don't you believe that maybe we're being deceived by Satan and we're allowing people in position of power that are maneuvering situations to fight and divide and conquer against one another? Don't you believe that that's what the big picture is happening here? We're allowing evil to divide and conquer one another. You don't believe that's what's happening?
So first of all, I want to apologize. I thought you had finished your question. I can apologize. I'm a big man. Okay, Satan Israel, Ha-Satan, the accuser. Absolutely. This is a religious conflict. You have so-called Palestinian types will say this is about land. No, this is a religious conflict. This is a spiritual conflict. This is an absolute clash of civilization. I agree. Islam versus the West. It's Islam versus Christianity versus our Judeo-Christian heritage. Let me tell you about Allah, who is the God of Islam. Surah 356, I think it is, or 354. Allah is the deceiver of deceivers. That is Islam. That is their God. And you know who that reminds me of? Let me finish. You know who that reminds me of? Satan. That is Islam. Now we talk about Christianity, we talk about Judaism, where there is a respect for life. I have met Israeli doctors, they tried to save Palestinian who their arms blew off, but they survived. And they don't have a death penalty in Israel. They don't execute these terrorists. I think they should. See, I'm hardcore. So there it is. I don't see evil. We're talking about classic
It's biblical, right? It's biblical. We're talking about.
So, bro, what we want to question, this, what's happening here is you're having a dialogue with Arthur. That's not fair to Nick. Okay, so we're going to stop here. We're going to move on to Nick. Do you want to respond to
I'll give you more time if
the
you
question
okay.
or the dialogue?
All right, yeah.
Quiet, everybody except Nick.
Thank you. So, Joe, in regards to, like, if I believe in Satan, yes. Do I think there are forces trying to divide and conquer the nation? Absolutely. And I'd say that those forces are emanating from Israel. Israel, or Zionists in this country like Bill Ackman, who are, going around and doxing college students with trucks if they simply attend a protest. These people are dividing our country. Our country is so divided and enraged because we have a foreign nation controlling our foreign policy. We have a foreign nation telling us that we need to send bombs to kill innocent babies and children on beaches. That's what we have. So again, the people dividing this country, I'd argue it's the Zionists. I'd argue the Zionist Jews who are telling us that we have to defund Israel in contravention to our own national interests are a huge national threat. And some of the things, back to what you said, do I think there's good people on both sides of the conflict? Absolutely. But this is a dichotomy here. The Zionists, they don't believe that. You know why? Because they think they're chosen. They think they're chosen and that none of us, any people, have a right to a state except them. That's what I think. I mean, you got to think of it. I mean, why is Israel operating in Europe and causing discord and ethnic tension there? Could you imagine if 500 Africans arrived on a boat to Israel? Oh, they would shoot them all dead, I can assure you. So again, just to kind of wrap it up, do I believe in Satan? Yes. Do I think we're being divided by, quite frankly, Jewish interests who wish to continue this parasitic relationship with the United States where we aren't in any control of our national interests? Then yeah. That's what I think.
Thank you.
Okay, great. You, sir.
Yeah, a week ago, the Jerusalem Post posted a situation where a Christian was fighting for Israel and was killed in Gaza. The family wanted to have this IDF soldier buried in Haifa's military cemetery. The IDF refused because the soldier and his parents, who happened to be Christian, wanted a cross on that tombstone. And the IDF said crosses are not allowed on this military tombstone, even though this Israeli soldier died in Gaza for the IDF. So it's not similar, it seems, like what we have in Arlington Cemetery, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians can be buried with religious symbols. How do you feel about that?
Oh, you me first? Okay, all right, yeah. So, well, it's totally disgusting. And Arthur talks about, Christians, and this is something Israel does. Like, oh, well, we're a multicultural state. We have 20% Arabs. Well, I don't know, just earlier, the 2019, the Knesset, which is the Israeli Congress, right? They passed a law defining Israel as an exclusively Jewish state. So I think it's important to clear that out. But in regards to the treatment of Christians, or, if I think that gentleman should have his cross displayed on his tombstone, absolutely. I mean, if he's a Christian, I'm sure he actually was a Zionist too. So he'd probably be shocked that the cross wouldn't be allowed to display it on his funeral, on his tombstone. But I also wanted to point out something I think that's kind of interesting when we look at it. I don't know if you were familiar, it was a video that went viral on X, but so many Christians travel to Israel every year, and I think some of them would be shocked at the way settlers treat Christians, spitting on them. I've seen that. There's actually an Israeli settler who said it's a common Jewish tradition to spit on churches and to spit on Christians. I mean, you can look this up. So if you have a problem with that, I don't know what to tell you. But to answer your question, the gentleman should have absolutely had the cross present. I could only imagine if someone, and again, not many Jews serve in our military. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But if there is an offhand that one did die in service of the United States for our military, I can only imagine what the response would be if they weren't allowed to have a Star of David. And again, this is just this total double standard that we see operating. So I hope that answers it, Jeff.
Okay, good.
Okay, so now I get to respond.
Can I clarify that comment?
I'm sorry, you can't.
No, you can't actually.
But you ask a question. That's what you can do to clarify that. So I want to speak to this now. Okay, so taking you at face value, the first thing I'm sensing is that this was if it's a Jewish cemetery, I get it. It has to all be Stars of David, so they have to bury the body somewhere else. Okay, so I do think that if you serve the country, you should be able to have a cross. I disagree with that. I do. I'm okay with criticizing Israel. I've done it. They had the worst lockdowns in the world. I can't believe Netanyahu got elected again. My God, they had passports in Israel. They did, vaccine passports. I don't agree with that. We're hearing about Jews are spitting at Christians. They're hyper-Orthodox. It's not a common practice. They get arrested. You didn't mention that. A lot of the anti-Zionists don't mention that part. They get arrested for it. But what happens when a Palestinian blows up a Christian or a Muslim? What happens? They get streets named after them. They get celebrations. They get a party. And I want to go back to 1948. There was this mention about Jewish terrorists. I watched Exodus. Yeah, I know there were Jewish terrorists. I'm not surprised. And guess what? A lot of them were rounded up and arrested when the Jewish state was formed. They got arrested. So you're not hearing about that. This is what the pro-Palestinian movement does, what the anti-Zionist movement does. They'll take one thing that's really offensive and forget the rest of it. Mr. Lavanafair over here, why didn't you mention it was a deep state action? You
Okay,
forgot
we
to
got
mention
to answer his question.
Doesn't matter.
Hold on, guys, stop.
Oh, what is this? I can't speak to other issues because he did.
No,
Interesting.
we got the question answered.
Interesting.
There's a lot of
If he speaks on other
opportunities
issues,
for,
and he's allowed to do that, I love it.
We're doing
And I should be able
great.
to
There's
speak
a
on
lot
this
of
too.
opinions going around.
And I still have time, and you interrupted me, so you have to give me my time back. Can you give me my time back, please?
Okay, can we?
Thank you. Where was I?
We're giving him 2 minutes to respond.
Oh, thank you. I want you to notice how he interrupted me. Whoa.
Who?
Now,
Who interrupted?
I want to go there because you've built on it, you've answered other stuff, and I love it.
Who
And I should be able to do that too. Excuse me. Excuse me. So,
Okay,
you were
just let him
talking.
finish. Thank you.
So, you mentioned the Levant affair. You didn't mention the fact that the Knesset condemned it. Why? You forgot that the Prime Minister condemned it. Why? He didn't mention the USS Liberty. My God, you anti-Zionist, you June 8, you got your flag. I care about those veterans. And you know what? They don't bitch about Israel, they bitch about LBJ. It's our American government that betrayed our veterans, and you exploit them, and it's shameful.
Let's hear on someone who, that woman over there.
Maybe we should let him ask one. I'm sorry.
Okay, question please.
Yes, this is a question for both of you. Do you believe that our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles?
Okay, that was a good question.
I want to give you a hand.
Country
A perfect question.
was founded upon Judeo-Christian values. So Arthur, you can go first.
Are you okay? Okay. Yes, 1,000 times yes. We weren't founded on Muslim values or Hindu values or secular values. There's a lot of talk that says, well, the framers were mostly secularists and deists. That's a lie. They were Christians. There was a Catholic, one Catholic unfortunately, but there was one Catholic in the Constitutional Convention. His name was Mr. Carrollton of Maryland. There were no Jews. There was one Jew in Philadelphia who said no religious tests. So that idea did get into the Constitution. So Jews did help. Some of them. There weren't a lot of Jews. So there's that. The Constitution, we see it's based on biblical principles, federalism. We see this idea of 2 witnesses needed for impeachment. That's a biblical principle. The real issue, some of the anti-Zionists, they don't like that Judeo part. It bothers them. Judeo-Christian. No, we're just a Christian country. Well, here's the deal. You can read about it in Romans, the New Testament. What advantage hath the Jew? In every way. To them were committed the oracles of God. That's the word. It started with the Jews. It didn't start with the Muslims, the Hindus, the Hungarians, my mom. No, it started with the Jews. But it culminates in Christ. Judeo-Christian. We are a Judeo-Christian culture. We are a Judeo-Christian country, and shame on anybody, including John Stossel. I got some libertarian leanings, but he's wrong. And he's Jewish, and he's wrong. We are a Judeo-Christian country, Judeo-Christian heritage, and that's why I support Israel. It's a Jewish state, by the way. That's why they called themselves a Jewish state. It was founded to be a Jewish state. That's the point. It's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy. But I jumped the subjects a little bit.
Okay.
30 seconds? Yeah. Oh, so I have one more time? I really appreciate you asking that. And again, they prayed. Benjamin Franklin, a deist, supposedly. No, he said, we need God's help. That was the most anti-deist thing he did. He believed in a God who moved in the affairs of men. They prayed for the Constitution to be established. Yes, we are a Judeo-Christian country. I would even go so far as to say as we need to really limit our understanding of religious liberty. Judaism, Christianity, okay. Hinduism, Islam, that's okay as long as you don't violate our Judeo-Christian values.
Okay.
So yeah, in regard, well, I'm a Roman Catholic, you know, so the whole term Judeo-Christian just seems kind of antithetical to me. When I think of, for example, the crucifixion of Christ, you know, the Pharisees had a choice, right? Who did they put out there? It was Barabbas and Christ, correct? I mean, I don't claim to be the most biblically sound. I am Catholic. That's a stereotype, okay? But look, they could choose a horse thief or they could choose the Son of God. And who did they condemn to death? They condemned the Son of God. And it's interesting because if you look at that whole display, Pontius Pilate said, this man has done no harm to me. But it was the insistence of the Pharisees who wanted to see Jesus executed for claiming that he was the Son of God. So the term Judeo-Christian, I think actually if you're a Christian, you should just get that out of your vocabulary because Jews have defined themselves as not following Christ for 2,000 years. So again, this whole notion of Judeo-Christian, I think, is totally antithetical, and I would argue that America is a Christian country in the mold of other European countries, like Hungary, like you mentioned, like England, who was our predecessor. And you know, again, you mentioned, unfortunately, but there was a Catholic who did sign the Declaration of Independence. His name wasn't Carrollton, that's where he was from. His name was Charles Carroll. But he signed the Declaration, and it's interesting because I don't recall any Jews signing the Declaration of Independence or any Jews signing the Constitution. So I don't really see the Judeo aspect of it. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. I think we're going to move on. That was a great question. You gave a great answer, Arthur. It was very complete. You gave a great answer too.
Do we have time for our closing statements, by the way? Or
yeah, we're gonna do one more question, and then we're gonna do closing statements. And Andrew, we'll go with you.
All right, this question goes for both of you. So taking into consideration, you have the Hannibal Accord, which is the IDF is supposed to shoot at any Israeli citizens that are supposedly being captured by Hamas. We also have other false flags, such as September 11th, that Mossad is probably responsible for. We have the USS Liberty, the Levant affair. It kind of seems like Israel is our greatest enemy. What's stopping the United States from invading Israel and defeating the IDF and imposing order and peace on the region ourselves, regardless of Muslim or Jew or whatever? Why shouldn't we just take the reins of the situation and impose this, since Israel seems to be an aggressive kind of thing?
That seems like a very clear question. Arthur, do you want to go first or second?
You get to choose. Isn't that interesting? I had to tell you about the USS Liberty. And then have you read The Attack on the Liberty?
Yeah.
James Scott, Larry Bowen.
Okay.
You know them? They testified in New Hampshire. I don't know why you weren't there. Interesting. I say this again. The veterans, their biggest problem is not with Israel. It's with our government. Robert Novak, always love your country, never trust your government. You want to know who really ended up trying to sink that ship? Lyndon Baines Johnson. The worst president we've ever had. Worse than Biden, worse than Obama.
He did it for Israel.
No, he did it because he wanted to cover his own ass. Right. You want to know what? Another spy ship got captured off of North Korea. He was a terrible president, covering his own ass, trying to secure a second term. He cared about himself and he abandoned our veterans. So when politicians go against us, we had a way of handling that in the past. Now you say Israel's an aggressor state. Israel destroys Hezbollah. Thank you, Israel. Israel cut off the cartels trying to go after Saudis on our territory. Thank you, Israel. Israel goes after these creeps. Israel went after ISIS in
went after ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. You don't know about that. Israel helped bring water to Jordan. Israel brings water to sub-Saharan Africa. They care about black people. Hey, great. They care about everybody. Why are you still talking? Excuse me. I get it. You hate Jews and you hate Israel. Just cut the crap and admit it. You think the Jews' fault, huh? You really believe the Jews did 9/11?
Absolutely.
Dancing Israelis, right?
100%.
How about dancing Palestinians?
Where were they?
Excuse me? Are you blind? They were celebrating it when that building went down. They were celebrating when Americans were taken hostage. October 7, 2023. It's okay for Americans to get killed by Palestinians. He's totally okay with that. I want you to see that.
All right, great.
And it's the Jews' fault.
Great question.
This is what motivates it, folks, and that's what motivates his hatred of Israel. It ain't about the Palestinians.
Quiet, please. Quiet, please.
Sorry, Mr. Trippy.
Quiet, please.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay, so Nick, did you want to address what came up in the question?
I mean, I guess I don't really think the United States should invade Israel, but I understand your sentiments regarding Israeli influence. Yeah, I guess, I really don't have much else to say there. That's kind of where I would say. But I mean, I think in regards to like some of these things, like Israel's fighting like terrorists and stuff, I mean, I don't know. Can anyone tell me when the last time Hamas attacked the United States was?
Never.
I can't remember, but Israel has spied on us. They've attacked their soldiers. I mean, and also if you think about too, like the Beirut bombing, why were our soldiers in Beirut in 1982? Because the Israelis asked President Reagan to go in there and stabilize it. And then, of course, predictably, they were blown up, just like our soldiers threaten to be blown up right now with the 200 Americans that are operating the THAADs in Israel. And earlier you said Israel can take care of Iran, then why is our THAADs over there? Because it seems like to me, anytime Iran or anyone shoots a missile, I just see videos of Israelis crying about, basically Roman candles falling down on them. But then they can go and level an entire apartment block, and that's them defending themselves. So it's totally ridiculous. But to answer your question, on the whole, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't agree with an invasion of Israel. I just would agree that an arms embargo, and we stop providing them any type of funding and treat them like any other country. Israel's no different than Iceland. That's what I would say.
Okay, all right, so good. So unfortunately, our time is up. We're going to move to the closing statements. So Arthur, would you give us your closing statement?
Okay, thank you so much. I have more than made the case for the following points. Israel has a right to exist. Hamas perpetrated the atrocities against Israel, must be destroyed. Every conspiracy against the Jewish state is a fraud or not a viable justification for delegitimizing Israel. The turmoil of the Middle East is not the Jews' fault. Support for Israel is not inconsistent with MAGA. The disturbing irony is the pro-Palestinian movement is antithetical to everything conservative, Christian, common sense, or American. They are anti-Christian, anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-constitutionalist. The Palestinian movement is anti-white. He's a white advocate, supposedly. Please explain that to me. It's a Marxist agenda that relies on conflict theory of oppressor versus oppressed. You've heard arguments that Israel's an apartheid state, nothing could be further from the truth. 20% of the population is Arab. They all supported the government, those elected to the Knesset. Arabs and Muslims have their own parties. Muslims serve freely in the IDF, along with Druze and Christians. Muslims are on the Supreme Court in Israel. Isn't that interesting? In the Gaza and the West Bank, there ain't no Jews, and there's hardly any Christians. They're marginalized and persecuted unless they pander to Islamic terrorists. Those so-called Orthodox Christians, this is disgusting. They line up with the terrorists. They take pictures with Christmas trees that have Islamic terrorists on them. I'll be on record for this. A so-called church that harbors terrorists, please blow it up. And I'm a Christian. Go ahead, take it out. Rawaf al-Sayyid, Saudi independent journalist, directly rebuked the Palestinian cause. You don't have a state. You have no case, country, or land. It belongs to Israel. That's in the Quran. And thank God for Musab Youssef. Palestinian is a mental illness of victimhood. Not an identity, not a land, not a culture. Cut the crap. Okay.
Okay, great.
All right, I can start?
Yes.
Yeah.
Your turn.
So when the global Jewish diaspora attempts to defend the heinous actions and godlessness of the Jewish state of Israel, they often invoke the phrase, never again. The Jewish people wield this phrase like some kind of incantation in which all fundamental criticisms of Jewish power, influence, and war crimes of the Jewish state of Israel are washed away. The logic behind this phrase is that since the Holocaust transpired, the Jewish people have a divine mandate in which to ensure their own existence, while at the same time vehemently denying that right to anybody else. In modern political parlance, there is much discussion surrounding the Great Replacement, a concept describing the dwindling European populations around the globe. Many of those involved in the Great Replacement, such as George Soros, Alejandro Mayorkas, and many others, just to name a few, are Jewish, and that sounds pretty anti-white to me. I'd argue that the Great Replacement actually preceded what we Europeans are experiencing today, and its antecedents lie with the Jewish machinations on what was then Palestine over a century ago. The original victims of what we know as the Great Replacement were the Palestinians, and the continued denial of their state, their history, and their very existence itself unequivocally constitutes a genocide. In the face of Jewish pressure, intimidation, and deception, let me state the following. Never again will we Americans who support the plight of the Palestinians allow ourselves to be silenced by the phrase, never again. Never again will we Americans who support the plight of the Palestinians allow Jewish sentiment to subvert our First Amendment rights. Never again will we Americans who support the plight of the Palestinians allow our government to wage wars for Israel with our blood, our treasure on behalf of a foreign nation. America first, now and forever. Free Palestine!
Good job, guys. That concludes our debate for the evening. Thank you for your attendance and your great questions.
Oh, it's 90. Go ahead. Keep it rolling. That was good.